As a heads up for this video, I recorded and edited this on very little sleep due to a busy week, so this might not be the most cohesive video, so just bear with me please. Hello, and apologies for the late video, but despite being late to the party, it's time for my weekly yap session. Before I even read this chapter, I saw very mixed reviews on this chapter. I saw a lot of people saying that this was absolutely peak, that Togashi was cooking. I also saw a lot of people saying this was boring, it was mid, blah 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 blah. If you ask me, this chapter wasn't what I was hoping for going in. About halfway through the chapter, I was like, is this really what we got? And by the end, I was like, dang, I was really hoping for more, like the last 6 chapters have been so go, go, go. This one felt like we stepped on the brakes a bit. But after, marinating with it, thinking about it, and, making this video, I appreciate this chapter way more because it's laying the groundwork for some really interesting stuff. But with that little point out of the way, per usual, it's about time for me to get into this chapter. However, this breakdown will be a little different from my usual because the majority of this chapter is an explanation of a game Morena will be playing, and it's very long and to me was very complicated, so I'm going to do my best to simplify and explain how this game is played, and then I'm just going to get into my thoughts about the chapter. But a few things before all of that. The chapter starts off with Hulkenberg's funeral service. We see a large crowd of people looking as his coffin passes by. And I think it's very interesting, this scene, because despite 3 other princes dying, as far as I can remember, this is the first time we've had a funeral service like this, and especially the first time we've seen citizens, let alone this many, appear so upset. Which I think kind of feeds into this theme that Hulkenberg is so well respected and so loved, and also has this Christ-like image to many people. We then get this panel of Hulkenberg's guards carrying his coffin up this massive staircase, which I think shows a lot more than just them carrying it up to the higher tier. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I feel like this kind of continues and fits the theme of Hulkenberg's Christ-like image, with this almost representing him rising into the heavens. I also saw this in a slightly different way as well, kind of adding commentary of the status of the princes. One of the ways I saw this panel is that Tier 1 represents a higher form of existence than the lower tiers. While there is no disrespect happening directly to the people of the lower tier, like no one saying is like, you are less than us, I feel like with the guards blocking the entry, this massive staircase into this beautiful architecture, and all this lighting coming from above, I believe it represents, but also serves as a reminder of how much lower the common citizens are in comparison to those on Tier 1, and that goes literally and figuratively. We then see that this is all happening at 1 p.m. on the 12th day. This is important because that means we've skipped a good amount of time forward. So that means Kurapika has been doing his training session for quite some time, and in a few more hours, Kacho, Melody, and Kaiser will begin their plan on kidnapping Prince Luzurus. It also means that Nobunaga, Krollo, Hisoka, Bonolenov, and everyone else has been moving forward with their plans, so I can only assume that after the events of this chapter resolve, we will move back in time to catch up with what everyone else has been doing. But overall, just keep in mind that we have moved forward in time. We then move to Tserriednich's supposed childhood friends. Whether Tserriednich values them as friends is yet to be seen, and I'm extremely doubtful that he does, but nonetheless, they view themselves as his friends. The group of friends start off by talking about how Borksen hasn't shown up or has been in contact despite the fact that they all agreed to check in with each other. Despite thinking that possibly she could have just been reassigned somewhere or was looking into a suspicious person, the group comes to the conclusion that she was abducted. And it was here that it was clear to me that Borksen was the Heily's kidnap target, and honestly, when they were discussing their plan, and I was talking about who I thought their target might be, I honestly forgot about these guys. I had seen someone comment on that video of chapter 405, I believe, that they thought that this friend group was going to be the target of this kidnapping plan. And when I read that, I was like, damn, I'm dumb for not thinking about that. But hey, I'm not here to provide omnipotent knowledge. I'm here to just kind of say whatever's on my mind, and maybe I say something smart. But anyway, the friend group goes on into various ways Borksen could have been abducted, but they narrow in on the fact that it was likely a Nen ability. Odoshin, if I'm saying that name right, suggests that the Heily are behind the kidnapping and that they plan to use Borksen as a pawn to assassinate Tserriednich. I'll get way more into what the true goal, or what I think the true goal of the kidnapping of Borksen is, but I'll just add in now that if Odoshin says that he thinks the Heily want to use her to assassinate Tserriednich, I think that that is absolutely not their plan, or at least not the core of their plan, because he doesn't seem like the type of person I'm going to trust on information. That being said, the group talks about possibly going to rescue Borksen, but they bring up how Borksen did say that if any of them get abducted, the rest of them aren't going to do anything. However, the group does agree that they have until the end of their guard shift to decide whether or not they'll try to rescue her anyway. We then move to Borksen waking up in the Heily base and sitting in a chair across from Morena. A quick thing I'd like to note is that throughout their entire interaction, Borksen's eyes are shaded in the same way as when she just wakes up from being unconscious. Granted, Morena's eyes have a similar shading, so I'm trying not to read too much into it, but overall, I believe that through this entire interaction, Borksen is not thinking 100% clearly. Now, she might not be completely out of it, but I think that it's interesting that her eyes are drawn this way and so consistently. So at best, I think she's thinking 99% clearly. But I think something is going on here. But moving on. Morena starts off by projecting a very polite and soft appearance as she welcomes Borksen into the hideout, and I will say that Morena keeps up this outward appearance throughout this entire interaction, but despite not being an end user and not being able to sense Morena's aura or any kind of intention like that, Borksen does make a comment about how much rage and anger Morena has within her, which just really goes to show how not mentally okay Morena is. And sometimes, because she's not as straightforward and directly evil as Tserriednich, sometimes I forget quite how cuckoo she is, but let's reel it back in here. Borksen quickly figures out that she is in fact talking to the Morena and asks what she wants. Morena says that she wants Borksen to join them, as in the Heily, and she adds that Borksen doesn't have to join them. She then refers to Borksen as a certain thing that I will get more into later because I think it's very important. But she says that Borksen is like a compatible donor and she'll do anything she can to get her to join them. Borksen thinks about how there are 6 people in the room, those being Morena, Gelato, Oralje, Volcante, Yokotani, and someone whose name we do not know yet. I think it's worth noting here that Oralje as an enhancer, and then Yokotani with his invincible ability are likely there to mainly serve as security, and they will also likely be the first 2 people who encounter Finks and Phaeton if they end up showing up during this interaction. Volcante is also there, and likely just because he's responsible for the doors that teleport people to the Heily base, so I assume that he's just there to maintain those doors. Meanwhile, Gelato and this unnamed girl, I feel strongly that they have an important role to play here. I just think it's too early to say for sure what their role is here, although you know I'm going to try to figure that out. But moving on for now, Borksen notes everyone in the room and thinks about how she doesn't remember anything about how she got there, but comes to the conclusion that she must have been abducted by the use of a Nen ability. Borksen then tells Morena that she'll need a minute to answer her, and this causes Morena to say she's smart to not give a yes or no answer right away. Morena follows up by saying that despite that the longer they talk, the closer they reach to the point of no return. Borksen asks if that's a threat, and Morena acts kinda all silly and innocent and says that that's up for Borksen to decide. Morena says that she can't get into specifics, but it's dangerous for the both of them if they talk for too long. Morena then pulls out a deck of cards and says that they'll settle this with a negotiation game. Or in other words, that Borksen will come to her answer through the playing of this negotiation game. The rest of this chapter is almost entirely the explanation of how they will play this game and how it works. So after I go through the explanation, I will then just get straight into my thoughts about the chapter overall. I will also say, to me personally, this explanation was very confusing, and I hope to simplify it and make it make sense to those people who are also confused, but let's just get right into it. So I'm going to start off by just explaining how the game works on its most basic level. It's a turn-based game where Morena starts with 7 cards that are all face up, and Borksen has 5 cards that are all face down. The game will start with Borksen picking one of Morena's cards. Each card essentially proposes a different question or set of questions that Morena has to answer. Once she fully answers said card, that one will then be discarded, and then it becomes Morena's turn. Morena will then pick one of Borksen's face down cards, of which she does not know which card has what face on it. But Morena will pick a card, Borksen will flip it over, and depending on what that card is, Borksen will either use that card and then discard it, or won't be able to play it in the moment and then discards it anyway. Morena and Borksen will go back and forth, and the game stops/ends when Borksen is left with one card. That final card will serve as the answer to Morena's original request, that being her wanting Borksen to join the Heily. While Borksen can use some kind of strategy to try to end up with the final answer that she wants, regardless, whatever that final card is will be her answer to that request, whether she is happy with it or not. So on a basic level, that's how the game works, but let's start getting into specifics. And let's start with what these cards are. Starting with Morena, she has 7 cards. A yes, no, objective, power, question A, question B, and deal. The yes and no cards, if chosen, Morena has to explain pretty much what will happen if Borksen's final answer is yes or no. Or in other words, give the pros and cons of answering yes or no. The objective card, if chosen, will force Morena to explain not only her goal for starting the game, but what her and the Heily's goal and objective is in general. And she has to explain this in great detail. The power card, if chosen, forces Morena to reveal and explain her Nen ability in full detail, and she has to continue explaining until Borksen has a complete understanding. The question A card allows Borksen to ask unlimited amount of questions, except they cannot relate to Morena's ability or objective, because there's already a card for that. But she can ask about anything else, although Morena can only respond in a very simplistic way with a yes, no, or yes and no. We then have the question B card, and here things get just a little more complicated. So the question B card allows Borksen to ask in-depth follow-up questions about the last question asked during the question A card. So for example, and just using a hypothetical here, don't worry about the specifics too much. If Borksen asked a slew of questions like, are you married? Do you live comfortably on the boat? And then asked something like, do you have a connection with a prince? If Morena says yes to having a connection with a prince, while Borksen could continue asking these yes or no or kind of maybe questions, if that answer of having a connection with a prince piques Borksen's interest, she could stop her questioning. Then upon her next turn, she could use the question B card to ask more in-depth questions about her connection with this prince. And while question A, Morena is limited to very simple responses, with the question B card, she can give way more detailed answers. But once again, the question B card can only be used on the last question asked during the question A card. So it's incredibly important that Borksen asks the right questions, as well as knowing when to stop asking when using the question A card, so she can make the most out of the question B card. Finally, for her 7th card, there is the deal card. This allows Borksen to retrieve a card from the discard pile in exchange for accepting a small request from Morena. We don't know how crazy of a request this can be. Maybe it's a foot massage, maybe it's to kill someone. But Borksen can either go through with the request and then retrieve a card from the discard pile, or she can be like, Morena, that is way too much, I'm not doing that, in which case nothing happens, but she cannot retrieve a card from the discard pile. And it's implied that the card that she would be retrieving would be one of Morena's, not one of her own. So to my understanding, if, for example, Borksen realized that she had more questions about Morena's Nen ability, but that power card had already been discarded, she could use this deal card to bring it back so she could then ask these new clarifying questions about her Nen ability. And once again, because the game ends the moment Borksen is down to just one card, if Borksen wants to play Morena's deal card, it has to be when she has at least 2 cards left. But with that said, that wraps up Morena's 7 cards. So let's get into Borksen's 5 cards. And those are a yes, no, return, joker, and X card. All 5 of these can serve as the final answer to Morena's request, which is once again, will you join the Heily? To an extent, the yes and no cards are pretty straightforward in what it means if that is the last card remaining. The only thing worth noting here is because there is something to be explained about answering yes or no through the fact that Morena has those yes or no cards on her side, it implies that simply answering yes or no is not as straightforward as it seems, and there are likely some kind of caveat or strings attached to those answers. We then have the Joker card, which can be played as either a yes or no if it's the final card. We then have the X card, and this is likely the best card Borksen has in her deck. The X card cancels the game entirely, letting Borksen leave without providing a definitive answer, and thus avoiding any potential strings attached or caveats to answering yes or no. The final card in her deck is the return card. This allows Borksen to retrieve any card from the discard pile and put it back in her hand. So, if as Morena is picking Borksen's cards, and say the first card Morena picks is the X card, and that gets put into the discard pile, if later on Morena picks the return card, Borksen can then use that opportunity to bring the X card back into her deck. On top of that, if the final card remaining is the return card, then Borksen can then choose any of her cards in the discard pile to act as her final answer. So as a final slight summary, all 5 cards act as a way to give a final answer to Morena's request of wanting Borksen to join the Heily. As each card gets chosen by Morena, they simply get discarded with the exception of the return card, but otherwise all cards once chosen will be discarded until Borksen is left with 1 card, and that will be her final answer. Then one final piece of information about the game is that it's made clear, and we are definitely supposed to believe this, that Morena will not try any underhand tricks, any weird way of wording things. The game is honest, exactly as explained, and they are simply going to play until they reach a conclusion. That being said, that does not mean that there is no strategy behind this game. Now, to get into very specific strategies of this game, I can't really go into that yet because we need to know what the strings attached to, for example, saying yes or no to the request are, but there are other slight aspects that I'll get into in a little bit. But with all that said, that explains the negotiation game, what these cards do. So with that done, I'm going to get into my overall ideas and thoughts about the chapter.
Quick post-edit note because I forgot to add a few things about the end of the chapter. So not only does Borksen agree to play the game, but she does it under the condition that she's the one randomly picking her cards instead of Morena. Morena agrees to these conditions, saying that she's played that way before, and then they initiate the start of the game.
So the first thing I'm going to start off with is something that kind of connects to potentially adding more explanation to this card game. And that's the fact that I believe that this card game is a Nen ability. I say that because not only is all of this explanation making me feel like I'm reading the explanation of a Nen ability, but there's a lot of Morena has to answer this way. She has to answer this question. Borksen has to ask her questions this way. She has to follow this rule. She has to do this. There's a lot of have to do. And with the very strong implication that neither of them can say no to these have tos, and with the additional fact that Morena outright stated that she does not want to harm or do anything, negative per se towards Borksen, it all adds up to sounding just like a Nen ability. In which case, whose Nen ability is it? Well, I for one hate being a sheep if everyone is agreeing with one thing. If I can find a semi-reasonable different explanation, I'm going to go with that. In this case, everyone is saying that this is Morena's Nen ability, which is very solid, very reasonable, and very likely explanation for what's going on here. And if perchance you're thinking that would give her 2 Nen abilities, allow me to explain. So when Morena affects other people with Contagion, they start at level 1, and when they reach level 20, they awaken their Nen ability. They continue gaining levels, and if they hit level 100, they can then start their own community, or in other words, they become what is known as Member Zero, and start infecting other people with Contagion, who then start killing to level up, to then awaken Nen abilities, and then they can reach level 100. But let's get back on track and talk about these Heily members that, if they potentially reach level 100, they will then essentially have 2 Nen abilities. They have the one they awakened through leveling up, and then by reaching level 100, they now have the use of Contagion. So if Morena started at level 1, which she definitely did because by the time we see her, she was level 45, it's very possible that along with being able to use Contagion, when she reached level 20, she was able to awaken a second Nen ability. This card game also very well reflects her personality, especially considering that this card game, whether through directly manipulating Borksen with Nen, or whether it's just to facilitate the manipulation through conversation, this card game is to serve as a way to manipulate Borksen, but likely anyone else who plays the game, into joining the Heily. And take a further step, I would say it's very likely that this card game makes you loyal to Morena herself. Once again, whether that be through direct manipulation through Nen or just manipulation through conversation. So overall, this card game could definitely be Morena's ability, and it also seems like and feels like it could be her ability. That being said, I don't know, maybe this makes me annoying, but I don't want to always go with the herd. So let me provide another possibility, although the evidence for this is much weaker than the evidence for Morena. And because of that, I'm just going to go over this very quickly. But here's my line of thinking. We have 5 more people in that room. We have Yokotani and Vocante, both of whom we already know their Nen abilities, so the card game does not belong to them. We have a third person, Uralje, who is an enhancer, and this does not seem like an enhancer ability at all, or even in the slightest, or even a little bit. Because of that, I think he is very safely out of the running for being responsible for this Nen ability if it does not belong to Morena. So that leaves us with this no-name girl and Gelato. Considering Gelato, as of chapter 393, did not even have an awakened Nen ability, and with the slight implication that this card game has been used to more or less interview every member of the Heily, this also puts Gelato out of the running for the ownership of this Nen ability. That leaves us with Miss No-Name Girl. And here's my line of thinking. We know at least the name of every single Heily member, every other member. We know absolutely nothing about this girl, which to me means that she's very important. I'd go a step further, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we do not know who the first person was that Morena infected with Contagion, so what if this no-name girl was that first person? I think in that case, it would be safe to assume that this girl is not only a proficient Nen user, someone who would be able to create an ability this complicated, but also very likely the most devout and loyal person to Morena. So let me throw this at you. What if this girl was the first person infected by Morena and the most loyal, and what she wanted to do with her ability when it awakened was to make an ability that could essentially be used by Morena to create the most loyal and effective group of followers? Especially if this no-name girl is a manipulator and this card game is a manipulative type ability or ability with a manipulative effect to it, that could be something that a very devout follower would want to give Morena. 2 more little points I'd like to make is, for one, I want to bring back this idea of how both Borksen and Morena's eyes were shaded a certain way throughout this entire chapter when normally that is not how they're drawn. It could have totally been an artistic choice, but what if they were drawn this way because they're both under some kind of Nen effect? What if they're both trapped or both are being affected by somebody else's Nen ability? Furthermore, Morena makes a point to say that the longer both of them talk, the more danger the both of them are in. She also makes a point to say that the longer they talk, the closer they come to a point of no return. Morena emphasizes that they're both in danger here, or at risk, making me think that they are both, once again, under the effects or influence of somebody else's Nen ability. Granted, Morena could have some kind of condition on her ability that makes it more powerful by her putting herself at risk, or maybe they're just under the effect of someone else's ability. But I'm gonna stop with that point. Y'all can make up your minds. You're grown enough. Next point. This is super short, super small, but in chapter 405, Kenny mentions Morena playing her Joker card, and in this chapter we see a Joker card. Now it is purely a coincidence, I'm positive, but hey, I wonder if this card game is so good at getting Morena the results she wants that this game is her trump card. That maybe, just maybe, anyone she gets into this game of cards, she will be able to get on her side. It's a stretch, probably a coincidence, just wanted to point that out. On to the next thing. I want to talk about Borksen a little bit. For someone who isn't a Nen user, who isn't familiar with the world of Nen, she did a very good job making sure to ask all of the right questions. She was very careful, although I'm questioning why she used up so much time after being told, don't use up too much time, it's dangerous. But aside from that, I'm very impressed by just how she handled the situation. She was able to stay pretty calm considering she was kidnapped and woke up in a strange place, woke up with her like enemy across the table from her. She kept her composure. She was acting very smart. My only real thing about this here is that I think it just kind of doesn't really matter that she's being smart. I think that the game is already lost. I think that without needing to cheat, without needing to do dirty tricks, just with, once again, assuming the card game isn't an ability, with just how the ability works inherently, I think that without being incredibly intelligent on top of being an end user. So unless if you're like someone like Kurapika, I can't imagine someone winning or beating Morena in this game. That being said, why Borksen? Why was she the one that was chosen? Upon first reading, I thought that the fact that she was chosen was completely random, that it didn't really matter because, like I said at the beginning, I don't think that at least the core purpose of her is to assassinate Tserriednich. I don't think that Tserriednich is the core focus on why they brought in Borksen. That being said, Morena has mentioned before that she did specifically want to bring in one of Tserriednich's followers slash friends. So with that being said, it's not like Tserriednich has nothing to do with why Morena wants Borksen. Despite that, I think Morena wants something way more important here. With the way Morena said that Borksen was a compatible donor, my mind immediately goes through needing an organ donor, thus bringing me to the thought that Borksen has something that Morena and likely the Heily desperately need. And once again, I think it's way deeper than just someone who could get close to Tserriednich, because if you ask me, Morena could get close to Tserriednich herself if she really wanted to kill him that bad. So here is kind of my thought process of how I ended up at my final thought. I think the answer can be found if we go back to chapter 405 when the Heily were meeting about their plan to kidnap Borksen. Rereading this part, I had a new understanding and appreciation of what they were really talking about. The specific parts I found important were Morena saying that Hulkenberg's funeral would be the perfect opportunity. This is likely because there would be so many guards present that if they were looking for specifically this friend group that is close to Tserriednich, that they would likely be there or present. Then we have Dogman saying that he can smell a person's Nen affinity and how proficient they are in Nen. This has me thinking that his job wasn't to search for a Nen user rather than somebody with the Nen affinity that they wanted, likely a specialist, which it could also be a manipulator or a conjurer, who knows what. Just specialist is the easy, rare type of affinity that the Heily and Morena could or would want. But more than that, he can also potentially smell how proficient they will be. We know he can smell how proficient they are, but maybe he can smell their potential. So maybe they wanted not only one of Tserriednich's friends, but they wanted to find one of them who has the potential to be a specialist and one that is skilled at that. We also have the fact that Sodom's kidnapping ability only works on people who cannot use Nen, so this just kind of, supports that they were looking for someone with Nen potential rather than someone who already has what they need. They want someone that they can mold for their purposes. So in short here, I think the goal was to use Hulkenberg's funeral where there would be tons of people present. Whether or not they were specifically looking for Tserriednich's friend group, while likely, it doesn't necessarily have to be their original plan, but they were using Hulkenberg's funeral to smell out someone that had a specialist affinity and likely had the potential to be very good at it. They then wanted to kidnap this person, get them to join the Heily, and likely through this card game, manipulate them into being loyal to the Heily and Morena. And if not direct manipulation through Nen abilities, then through revealing certain information, whether it's how bad of a person Tserriednich is, or maybe just sharing her worldview. By the end of the game, Bork will be loyal to the Heily and Morena, I believe, unless if it's for some reason interrupted by the Phantom Troop, Finks and Phaeton, but I think that's where we're headed. I think that was the original plan of this kidnapping. I think that's what they went with Borksen. And I think that's kind of the end goal of what we see in this chapter. Other than that, I don't have much, but to speak quickly on Finks and Phaeton, we know that they're on their way to the Heily base, so they will be interrupting this, or at least should be interrupting this whole game. I just am really hoping that they interrupt it after Morena wins or gets what she wants. I want Morena's plan to go through, and then they can interrupt it. So I'm hoping that by the end of the game, Borksen becomes loyal to Morena and the Heily, and then the spiders show up. But that's all I really got for today. Sorry this video came out so late, but this chapter may not have been what I wanted at first, but I always trust Togashi. I see the vision. It's laying the groundwork for some awesome stuff. I'm excited for the future chapters. And if you made it through to this part of the video or made it through to the end, thank you for watching. Per usual, feel free to leave your thoughts and theories in the comments, and I'll see you Sunday or Monday for chapter 408.